Impact Teams Radio. Welcome to Impact Teams Radio, the show where we explore what it takes to be a leader of the leaders in corporate America. Get ready to be inspired and discover proven tips for going from average to exceptional. Now, here's your host and guide, Tony Sherman.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Impact Teams Radio. I'm your host and guide, Tony Sherman. And with us today we have Dave Stachowiak. Sorry, Dave, I still murdered your name. Dave can tell us the proper pronunciation in a minute. Dave is a leadership trainer, a strategist, a consultant, and an educator. His goal is to maximize human potential for leaders and organizations. So Impact Nation, that makes him just the right kind of person that we want on a podcast that's focused on leaders leading leaders. So if you're interested in maximizing the human potential, not just of yourself, but of those that you lead and those around you, then I'm sure that Dave has a lot of wisdom and insight to share with us. Dave, welcome to the show.
Hey, Tony, I'm glad to be here. And, just about all of my good friends in the world have mispronounced my name many, many times. So that just means you and I are going to be great friends.
See, he's gracious. That's the first thing we learned about Dave. Dave, thank you very much for coming on the show. Why don't I step away from the microphone for a minute or two and ask you to introduce yourself to our listeners so they can learn a little bit more about you.
Well, thank you, Tony, and I'm so thrilled to have the opportunity to be here to speak with your audience, and thank you so much for the invitation. My name is Dave Stachowiak, and as you mentioned, I've been very much interested in maximizing human potential and have been doing that throughout my career. And in fact, I've really been at what I call the intersection of business and education for my entire career, and have been privileged to do that for several organizations. And what I've been doing for the last 10 years now is working for Dale Carnegie Training. I'm an executive VP of talent development here on our Southern California office. And for the last, most of that time, 8-9 years, I've been actively working with clients out in the corporate classrooms of America and helping to teach the wisdom of Dale Carnegie to the people in those organizations who practically want to lead better, communicate more effectively, be able to inspire others, and to do it in such a way that's very true and genuine to who they are. And so that's been a real privilege to be able to do that, and to be able to take the wisdom that Dale Carnegie first wrote about in his very popular book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, and to bring that daily into organizations. And it was about 3.5 years ago that I decided to launch my own podcast called Coaching for Leaders. And so that airs weekly and is my attempt to add something to the world to really help people to become more effective communicators, effective at human relations, leading others, and their own personal mastery. And I also now produce a show for the Dale Carnegie folks called Carnegie Coach, and that's just a daily show teaching Dale Carnegie's wisdom. So it's been a lot of fun, and I'm just thrilled to be able to work with people to help them to get the best out of themselves and out of others.
That's fantastic. So Impact Nation, you've just learned of 2 new podcasts that you should be listening to. So, Dave, what I'll make sure is that we put that into the show notes at the end of this.
Thanks, Tony. That's fabulous, and I look forward to helping folks if it's of interest to them too.
Excellent. So, Dave, the reason I asked you to be on the show was I'm passionately interested in coaching leaders. So if we can focus in on that as a topic for today, my first question would be a simple one. Are leaders open to coaching these days?
Well, I think the answer is it depends. Like the answer to any good question, I suppose. I think generally speaking, most people are realizing these days that the old way of doing things from a generation ago of command and control, of I'm the manager and I tell you what to do, which was the model of, I don't know if we'd call it leadership, but certainly the model of management up until a generation ago. That model has, in a lot of industries and organizations, now being recognized as not really sufficient. It's not the way to engage people. And the leader of today, the person who really wants to engage their employees, their colleagues, their customers even, is a leader who is thinking about, how do I look at things from the other person's perspective? How do I bring other people up with me? and how am I going to do so in such a way that helps the entire organization and even beyond the organization be successful? And I think that most people, when they think that through and they think about their own development, come to the conclusion that there's a consistent process that they're going to want to follow to become better and more effective. And I think that's one of the reasons we've seen such an interest just in the last 6 months to a year of people reaching out and finding podcasts, and why we've seen this explosion of blogs on the internet over the last decade is because the information is out there and people are seeking it. And for the most part, most of the leaders I know really do want to learn how to grow and to become effective. And so that's really exciting for me, and being able to work in this industry is to be able to be a part of that conversation. And I think very much people want to get better and are looking for the resources in order to do that.
So, and do you find, I would agree with you on a personal level, that most people who are wishing to mature and looking for resources can see coaching as very powerful. And I think it's one of the most powerful teaching models there is. But do companies buy into it enough that they're willing to invest and pay for their people to be coached?
Well, I think it depends on the organization and the situation. There's certainly companies that are very open to coaching, invest a lot of resources into coaching, both internal coaches and external coaches and people who are doing executive coaching. There are organizations that are very much against that and do not make those investments. Most of the organizations that we've worked with at Dale Carnegie over the years, and I've worked with individually as a consultant, are open to coaching to some extent. Often that is with the senior leaders. There's a perception, right or wrong, that senior leaders tend to benefit more from coaching, and that works better with schedules and logistics for a senior leader. We could argue that all day long, I suppose, as far as whether that's really the case. But the key thing with coaching is, of course, and the number one rule is that, coaching is permission based. So it's really up to the organization and the individual as to whether or not they're going to see coaching as valuable. And that really does vary with individuals and with teams and with different leaders as far as, how much they see that as valuable and whether they believe that to be something that's going to be a resource in their professional development.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. But to some extent, what you said made me a little sad, because I do agree the one place I've seen coaching is in VPs and above. But I always take the Tiger Woods model. When did Tiger Woods get a coach? Before he was a winner. Why is Tiger Woods why was he such a consistent winner? Because he had a coach from before he was a winner.
Yeah.
I think you want to identify those people that you want to be the winners of tomorrow and start coaching them today. But how you get the buy-in, I'm not quite so sure I know the answer to that one.
Well, and I think that you've hit on something that's really an economic reality for a lot of organizations, Tony, is that it is just, it's for most organizations, it is not cost effective to make an investment for one-on-one coaching for a large majority of people or in even the highest performers in the organization. And that's why we tend to see the investment made for senior leaders. And that's very sensible in the fact that the senior leaders tend to have more influence as far as organizational culture and really can affect change. So there's the argument that coaching's, the return on investment may be higher there. But I'm very much with you. I would love to see coaching skills used throughout the organization. And that's one of the reasons that I'm so passionate about doing my podcast and of my work with Dale Carnegie, is because we teach those skills to people at all levels of the organization. So whether they have an individual coach or not, that they can use coaching skills to be able to develop people, to learn about them, to help them to grow, to use permission-based coaching in a way that will help people to really engage with the organization. And so I think to the extent that we all can provide resources to organizations and individuals within organizations to do that well and to learn that skill set early on in a person's career, I think that's hugely valuable for people.
Yes, it makes a lot of sense. And as you were talking, the model that was coming to my mind was, and based on agreeing what you said about the economic constraints, is quite often there'll be an all-hands meeting, an all-hands week for professional services or for the sales team or so forth. Those are the times where you potentially could take the young, fresh managers and, as you said, start to train them in the right way and teach them some basic coaching skills. That there must be some in-service points where that's just a worthwhile endeavor, I would imagine.
Oh, for sure. I think that is a skill set that is talked about a lot. I mean, a lot of people throw around the word coaching, and I don't think a lot of times it's really thought through as far as what it is we really want to teach people. But the skill of coaching, of really asking questions, of listening well, of meeting a person where they are and helping them to get to where they want to go and forming an action plan around that. I mean, those are the kinds of things that any manager, any leader in any organization should have at least a base knowledge of how to be able to do well. And I'm a big believer in people developing that, and certainly work hard to do that every day. One of the realities, Tony, is I was thinking about what we just said a moment ago with coaching, and this is, I don't know, maybe it's a dirty little secret of coaching, I don't know, but one other real reality I found in working with people that are not at the senior levels when I have engaged as a coach is it's hard. It is very hard sometimes to coach someone who is at the middle or even at a lower level in the organization, because they don't have as much of the position, power, or authority to influence change in the organization. And sometimes we do run up against a lot of things that are just realities of working in that organization, realities of that organizational culture. And so that's a real obstacle sometimes to change. Certainly that person can benefit a lot themselves, but as far as affecting organizational change, having the senior leaders involved is really helpful, and where that investment can really pay off in a big way.
Okay, so I see where you're coming from. Basically, as an economic driver to get into an organization, you're saying that coaching will affect the organizational change, therefore go from the place of maximum effective influence, which is the senior level. Whereas if you go to the middle level, unless you're willing to build in, as a previous guest on our show, Tim Higgins did, he's working with companies where they're building coaching as part of their overall strategy, and everybody effectively goes through coach training and so forth. And Tim has now become a coach's mentor, if you will, to the organization. Unless they buy into coaching at that level, then you're always going to be at the VP or above level, really, aren't you?
And in a perfect world, organizations would do both of those. But sadly, the former is more often the case, where it's just the senior leadership team that gets coaching, if at all. And I think that is changing. I certainly see evidence of that changing, and more organizations realizing the value of that. But I think we do still have a long way to go as far as really, truly bringing that skill set and seeing organizations that are willing to make that investment in training of the entire employee population. And it'll be really exciting to see what happens in the next 5 to 10 years around that, and how that continues to evolve.
And colleagues and friends of mine that are coaches are saying, like you're intimating here, there's definitely a sea change. And you've already said, with podcasting and blogging and so forth, they're almost like precursors or indicators of a potential sea change.
It is, and I'm thinking back to a few months ago. My wife is a university professor and has a show on helping professors become better teachers. And we were talking with one of her expert guests on just the difference in generations and how they interact with technology. And he made the point, which I thought was really profound, that this is the generation that's now entering the workforce is the very first generation that did not have to go to an authority figure to get information. Whether that authority figure be an employer or a professor or a parent, that now the availability for many people, especially many people that are listening to our conversation, to get information is just ubiquitous in so many places. And so the dynamic has changed of the leader, professor, parent, whatever authority figure you want to look at as being the source of expertise. Now you can get that pretty much anywhere. And so that dynamic changes as far as if that's where we are, if that's where we're focusing our management on, as far as I have this power over the information and expertise, those days are over. So it really does change the dynamic for leaders is how are we really investing in people, and how are we taking the information that people are already getting out there and supporting them and really looking at things from their perspective so that they can really grow their careers and be valuable for their organizations, their careers, and the work that we're helping our organization to achieve too. Yeah,
it makes a huge amount. As soon as you said it, it's like a light bulb went off. Yeah, it just makes so much sense that everybody now. I mean, information is not a differentiator. It's wisdom and how you use the information. It's a differentiator, because these days you can get hold of almost anything with almost zero cost. So, Dave, I'm conscious of time, but we're by no means running out. But you've mentioned a few times about the ways that people can coach and so forth, and coaching at the middle level. Do you have anything that we could give our listeners, like models or approaches to coaching, which they potentially could take and with their next interaction start to use them to improve their coaching skills?
I do indeed. And one of the models that I've used for our Coaching for Leaders community that I know has been really helpful to people is a acronym I use called FROM, F-R-O-M. And it's really the starting point for coaching to really find out where a person is coming from. And if we appreciate where a person's coming from, we're just much more likely to notice them, to appreciate them, and to invest in them. Case in point, Tony, I was outside last night. My son is almost 3 years old. We were going for a walk around the neighborhood, and he has learned over the last year that the noises, as far as the insects that he hears in the neighborhood, are crickets. And so we've talked about that on many occasions. And so anytime the crickets are chirping, he always notices, and he talks about it. And he was telling me last night, he's like, "Daddy, I hear the crickets." And he notices it because they have a name, because we've talked about them before, and he understands that that's part of his world. And so he, by being able to call it by name and knowing something about that animal that's in the world, he notices it, he sees it, he recognizes it when he hears it, and he has dialogue about it. And I don't think that organizations in some ways are all that different. I think when we take the time to invest in someone up front, when we know them, when we know a little bit of their life story, their career story, then they are not just an employee or a colleague. They're a person. They're a person that we care about. And so this model I found has been helpful for people in doing that. So I can walk through each one, Tony, if that's helpful.
Absolutely. But before you do, one thing that just I pull out for our listeners that I've already got is, I think when you're walking around the neighborhood with your son, he's actually having a conversation with you about something he can't see. He can't prove it is there, but he knows the indicators are there, so he can have a conversation about you. And I think a lot of times in the business world, when we're dealing with concepts and ideas, we have to realize that there's a reality there where we have to become jointly aware of that reality. In other words, we've moved beyond the manufacturing of a widget, where we're in the ideas and concept stage.
I love it, Tony. And in fact, Luke and I have had many conversations about, where are those crickets? But which tree, Daddy? Show me. And it's dark, of course. Even if we could find them, we wouldn't be able to see them. So it is funny how much we do need to trust and to buy into things sometimes we don't see or aren't immediately apparent to us from an organizational standpoint. I love that analogy.
So, Dave, I hijacked where you were going. Would you walk us through the FROM model?
So the FROM model, the very first one is F, which is future. So future is us as a leader, a colleague, even an employee, really, it could be utilized anywhere, is learning from someone where they're planning to go in the future. And so that might be, what is it you want to learn in this role? What is one of your objectives? What's something that's really interesting to you to be able to achieve? So we learn a little bit about where they're planning on going and where they want to head down the road. And that doesn't need to be as formal as, where are you going to be 5 years from now? I'm not a huge fan of that question, but it can be something of just engaging them and talking about their, what's important to them? What are they dreaming about? Where do they want to go in their careers? What are they interested in learning? The extent that we can find something about that, I think, is really helpful. The R then is reality. So compared to where you want to go, where are you today? So if they talk, for example, about wanting to really become more effective at developing their marketing skills. One of the things I'd be really curious as a leader, coach, colleague of knowing where they are today. You know, what have you done with marketing in the past? What's been your what's your skill set currently? What kind of projects have you worked on? So, and part of the reason, so the future and the reality, if you do those two things well and just ask a few questions, you really get a good sense of the gap. And we talk about that a lot in coaching of, you know, where a person is versus where they want to go. And then that helps you as a leader, colleague, coach, friend, whatever the situation, to really see here's the gap. And then here's potentially the places you'd go between those. The O then is the obstacles. So that's what obstacles have you run into in the past when trying to develop that skill or become more effective at this or reach that achievement? And what obstacles do you see or foresee coming in the future? And that's good for both of you to know, because especially if you're in a capacity as a coach or a manager, or even a parent, of trying to figure out, you know, what are the things that we both can acknowledge you're likely to run into. So when you hit those obstacles, not if, because we always hit obstacles, then that's something we've already discussed, we've talked about, we know this is going to be an issue, and then we can really spend our time on how do we work through it, and how do I support you, and how do you even maybe support me in us getting through that time so that you can ultimately be successful. And then the M is meaning. And that's a key one, because it's not just about I'm here and I want to go there. It's also about, well, what does that mean to you? Why is that important? So you want to become a great, a skilled person at being able to navigate social media, or you want to become the CEO of a company someday, or you want to become more effective at being able to think on your feet when briefing an executive team. Well, what's the reason behind that? So why? You know, why is that important to you? That's the kind of thing that I like to get beyond the surface, you know, what's going on, and more into the real deep meaning. Because, and sometimes people will say, well, I want to make more money, or I want to get to and those are all valid things. But I'm more interested in, like, okay, so if you did make, you know, $20,000 more a year or whatever it was, what would you do with that? What's the real meaning behind that? And then when you hear people say something like, well, you know, I have a child that really wants to go to this college or university, and making $20,000 a year more would really be the difference maker of being able to get to that university and us being able to support that child as a family. That to me is really interesting. And that's the thing that if I know that about a person, I'm like, okay, that's a key motivation. That's the kind of thing that if I can honor as a coach and as a leader and help support them to getting there, and knowing what's the driving factor for them, I can really help to support them in that way. And I also see them not just as an employee, but also as a human being. So I found that those four steps, that future, you know, where are you going, the reality of where you are, the obstacles that you're going to face along the way, and then what's some of the not just obvious meaning beyond that, but meaning behind it, but what is it that you really want, the reasons, the bigger reasons you want to achieve that. That if I can get a snapshot of that on the front end of working with someone or supporting someone, that really helps me to not only know where to go as a coach and as a leader, but Tony, to be more excited about helping that person to get there, just as a human being. And so that model's been really helpful to me, and many of my clients have found it helpful too.
Yeah, it sounds very powerful, and I like the fact that with the meaning comes the motivation. I was taking down notes like crazy at that point, because once you know someone's meaning and motivation, even if they find that something's happened in the workplace where they have to take a left turn or a right turn, you still know what their drivers are, and you can help them reshape potentially career-moving or career obstacles into, well, there are a different opportunity here which still gets you to your goal. So I think that's incredibly powerful.
Well, thank you. And I think that this is part of the real work that we do as leaders and coaches, is often if we are in that role, we have a perspective that person may not see. So we might see the value in working through an obstacle that person does not, because they haven't been through it before, they haven't been through that experience. And we can see how working through that obstacle is going to help them to where they want to go 10, 15, 20 years from now. And we can make the connections just because we've had the experience and we've just sometimes have a bigger perspective. Not that we're smarter or better or anything, but we've been through it before if we're in a leadership capacity. And so I think one of the real jobs and the real good work of a leader is to help people to see that and to see that, this is working through this helps get you to that long-term goal, because we're so trained in Western culture and especially the business culture to think about the very short-term things. And if we can help people, in addition to looking at the short term and looking at the quarterly numbers and all of those things that are important, but also to look at how working through this is going to help serve where you want to get 5 to 10 years from now, and how that developing this skill set you're struggling through right now will support you in that meaning of where you want to go and why that's important to you and your family and your career, then that is the kind of work that no blog or podcast is ever going to do. That is the real work Absolutely. Of a one-on-one coach, of a manager, of a leader, of working with that person to say, I care in you, I invest in you, I know you, and I am going to support you in getting to what's going to help both of us.
Dave, I've got to thank you there, because that was really, really clever what you did. And it's almost like I was your straight man, because my next two questions were, why would somebody go and get coaching? And then why would somebody pay for someone to get coaching in their organization? And you, in that final part, has just summarized everything perfectly. Thank you very much.
My pleasure, Tony, and thanks for the questions. I love speaking about how people can be more effective, and I do think that one of the great opportunities that we have in business organizations around the world and the nonprofits that we support is to really bring this skill set of coaching and leadership and communication and human relations to all levels of the organization. Is that, coaching is not just for a CEO or for a high-level executive. Coaching is for the skill sets are for everybody. And any manager can do something like this to engage with people and support them. And if they're able to do that, they're the kind of person that can really affect great change in the world.
Absolutely. So, Impact Nation, you've heard from Dave Stachowiak how to, first of all, we learned his problem model, but he's also given us a model for ourselves to be better managers, better leaders, by being better coaches. So if you take one thing that you've learned in this podcast, put it into your practice for the next 6 months, my promise is you'll be a much better leader in 6 months' time than you are today. Dave, thank you very much for your time today.
Well, my pleasure, Tony, and I'll do you one better and send you a link for your show notes of an audio of me actually going through the From process with a friend. And so if folks are really looking for the nuts and bolts of how to do that, they can tap into that as well, and it'll help give them the real nuts and bolts of the questions they can ask.
Thank you, Dave. That's incredibly generous. So I know you will get at least one listen out of that. That's my absolute promise, because I intend to listen to it myself, and I'm hoping that Impact Nation are wise enough to do it as well. So until next week, Impact Nation, take one thing you've learned, practice the From model on someone, look at the show notes, go listen to how it's done well, and copy that yourself. Until next week, this is Tony Sherman, your host and guide, signing off.
That's it for this week. Thank you for listening. Now go and apply these few gems. Make the wisdom you have heard your own. If you want to be part of our launch success, then please go to impactteamsradio.com/love and tell the world. If you want more and never want to miss a beat, please go to impactteamsradio.com/subscribe. If you have 3 minutes, we would love to see a positive review on iTunes. And until next time, remember to act on what you've learned, and you'll be ahead of most of the world. Impact Teams Radio.